This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, I see it up there now. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first virtual CTAC meeting, which will probably be the first of many more. This is Bob Basham. Herb could not be here today, and they asked me to step in since I'm vice chair.
So we're going to ask everyone, if you're not speaking, to mute your line.
Yeah, if you will look down on your name or whatever, the little left hand, reach down to the bottom, there's a thing that says MIC. It looks like a microphone. If you just click on it, it'll mute you. There's some procedures that we're going to have to go over here. It's going to be a little bit different to start the meeting. Everyone was sent a package on this, but we're going to have to do a roll call, and we have to do some readings to get everything started. So I'm going to get that get it started. We ask everyone to identify themselves first when speaking so we can more accurately record the activities of the meeting. All the lines should be muted to minimize additional noise and feedback. You just need to click on your little mic there at any time to request acknowledgement from the chair. Staff will be monitoring the chat throughout the meeting. Excuse me. So I don't see that right on my screen right this second, Chet, but you may be able to go over where that chat box is or whatever so that you can send in questions. But the big thing is here is that we don't want to overlook anyone wishing to participate in the discussion. I'm now going to ask our clerk to certify we have followed the approved procedures for appropriate notice this meeting, and that means which we're convening. When your name is called, please unmute and say aye, and during the roll call. If we miss someone or so afterwards, or someone's joining us while we're doing the roll call, anyone who wishes to identify themselves following the roll call, members will be invited to do so. So please take it away, Ms. Clerk.
Nicole, you're muted. Hey, Nicole, you're muted.
Nicole, can you hear me?
1 second. Let me send her a text to make sure she gets it.
Yeah, I know her mic was working because we heard her. Folks, bear with us. We just remember it's the first time, so got to work out a few little things here and there.
Could we go through reading the, the electronic thing and then come back to do attendance when she's on?
Chet, that's fine with me if you want to do that, or you got to tell me what's procedure.
Yes, sir, that's fine. And I've got it on the screen too, if everybody wanted to follow along.
Okay. Since the governor declared the state of emergency on March 12, 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, state and local government bodies have been providing for the continuity of government by meeting remotely by telephonic or electronic means in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, the Commonwealth's emergency and other applicable laws, guidance provided by the Attorney General and the respective legal counsel. On April 22nd, the General Assembly approved a budget amendment to authorize all public bodies, including regional bodies, such as Plan RVA and the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization, likewise to meet by electronic means without a physical quorum assembled together during a governor-declared state of emergency, as long as certain conditions are met as to provide for the continuity of government operations. This new authority is effective immediately. The bylaws of the RRTPO define a quorum of the body to be a majority of the committee's membership. The 2020 COVID-19 virus makes it impractical and unsafe, even potentially life-threatening, for a quorum of this size to physically assemble in one location. Pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3708.2A3, further, the virus makes it impractical and unsafe for the public and the agency staff to gather in the same location to participate in this meeting. The health and safety and welfare of our community is of paramount importance. Therefore, we have determined the appropriateness and eligibility to conduct today's meeting of the RRTPO electronically pursuant to the provisions of Virginia Code 22-3708.2 and related legislation approved by the General Assembly of Virginia, and in light of the Governor's State of Emergency Declaration for COVID-19. The convening of the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization, CTAC, has been determined necessary in order to continue the necessary business of the organization. The matters included on the agenda address important and essential matters of continuing the work of government, and therefore it is appropriate to convene during this time. While we do not know the exact duration of the current practice of electronic meetings, we will continue to function in this manner until such time as it is deemed advisable to return to in-person meetings. At this time, we expect meetings to occur in electronic format through the declaration or June 10, 2020. RRTPO staff have provided notice of this meeting and the means by which we are virtually gathered to members of the public. Notice was provided on May 14, 2020 through posting on the Plan RVA website and distribution of email notification to members, alternates, and known interested parties, including the media. In order to comply with the provisions of Virginia law and to improve accessibility to the discussions intended for today, this meeting will be recorded. Audio-visual recordings of the meeting will be posted on the Plan RVA website within 48 hours of this meeting. Any members of the public wishing to address the RRTPO Community Transportation Advisory Committee are invited to submit comments via email until the close of business one day prior to the meeting in order to be reviewed and addressed during the meeting if necessary. Anyone participating as an observer during the meeting today may submit comments or questions at any time during the meeting via email at rrtpoinput@planrva.org or by using the online chat functions of the meeting platform. Those individuals who are observing by phone may be called upon to address the RRTPO CTAC with their questions or comments. All comments and questions submitted during the meeting will be reviewed following the meeting, and to the extent practical, responses may be provided or posted on the Plan RVA website. Questions? Does anyone have any questions regarding the process for ensuring effective facilitation of the meeting or how the members of the public may participate? Hearing none, maybe if we've got Nicole back, she could do the roll call. Nicole, can you hear me? And I don't think the voice is coming through to
I think she's having some technical difficulties. We'll go ahead and I'll do the procedures for the electronic meetings.
her. Okay.
Okay, so the notice of meetings, public bodies supported by Plan RVA will be given in accordance with applicable laws and the body's bylaws. In general, notice will be provided at least 10 days prior to the scheduled meeting and include the proposed agenda and meeting materials, as well as confirmation of the date and time and instructions to access the meeting. This notice will be posted on the Plan RVA website, links to which will be distributed to all members, alternates, interested parties, and our media contact list, assuring that members of the body and the public are notified concurrently. Contents of the notice will include the date and time of the meeting, the electronic means by which the meeting will be held, and instructions for joining the meeting as a participant or observer, the method by which the meeting agenda and materials can be accessed, and the public participation process for meetings, including the methods by which comments may be provided by members of the public before, during, and after the meeting. Members of the public are invited to participate in public meetings of Plan RVA, the RRTPO, and their respective committees. The following are new ways members of the public can participate in and follow the business of Plan RVA and the RRTPO during this time. Anyone wishing to participate as an observer in a public meeting may do so. They should register with Plan RVA staff to get access to the meeting instructions and may sign on online or dial in by phone. Anyone wishing to submit comments prior to the meeting may do so by email. Comments received by 5 p.m. the business day preceding the meeting will be provided to members of the public body and included in the administrative record. Members of the public may use the chat feature in the online platform to submit questions or comments during the meeting. These will be recorded and included in the administrative record. And just a note, the chat function will be on the right side of your screen. It looks like a little talk bubble. If you click on that, there should be a chat window that opens. Finally, agendas will be modified to offer 2 opportunities for members to address the bodies during the meeting. At the beginning, to address members regarding agenda items, and at the end, to raise any other issues not included in the day's meeting agenda, as is customary. In order to clearly communicate the electronic means by which the meeting will occur, the agenda itself will include the following information in addition to the regular order of business and discussion and action items. Notification of the electronic means for hosting the meeting, including access information. Public announcement made by the presiding officer, administrator, or clerk secretary at the beginning of the meeting. Certification that the procedures were followed to adequately notify the public. The roll call of those participating as a member of the body in the call, and an invitation to others to identify themselves. The statement concerning public comments submitted via email or via online meeting platforms will be shared with members of the public body and included in the agency's administrative record. Opening the floor for any member of the public to address the body regarding any matter included on the agenda for the meeting, all planned agenda items, and finally opening the floor for any member of the public to address the body regarding any matter germane to the body but not specifically included in the agenda. Minutes of each meeting shall conform to the normal standards of minutes recorded for the body. Additional documentation should include the fact that the meeting was held as an electronic meeting pursuant to the authority and reference to specific disaster declaration, the type of electronic means by which the meeting was held, and each member of the public body who participated in the meeting. Other participants in the meeting as observers may identify themselves, and if so, will be included in the record. In addition to written record of the meeting, audio video recording will be posted within 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion on the Plan RVA website, along with the written records once approved. The body may approve the minutes of an electronic meeting at a subsequent electronic meeting or one that is held in person. These procedures shall only take effect in the event of a state of emergency declaration pursuant to Virginia Code, whereby electronic means of hosting meetings of the public body is the only practicable way to continue the conduct of the organization and achieve other objectives to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community and the body's members and staff. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the procedures for electronic meetings. I did want to let everyone know that we did not receive any advanced questions or comments via email, so that information is yours to consider. Nicole, are we back with you again?
Yes, Chad, I'm back. I switched devices. I apologize for the technical difficulties today. I'm not sure what I missed. Can we go ahead and do a roll call for attendance?
That's what we're doing. That's what we're looking for, Nicole. Appreciate your help.
Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and take attendance by roll call. Please unmute yourself when you hear your name and say aye or present, so we know that you're here today. Chesterfield County, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Rich Wine. Ms. Robinson. City of Richmond, Ms. Erickson. Mr. Steele. Mr. Barnhart. Mr. Hill. Goochland County, Mr. Basham.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Rasnick. I'm sorry, is Mr. Rasnick here? Yes. Yes. Henrico County, Mr. Barrett.
Here.
Miss Lancaster.
Present.
New Kent County, Miss Guthrie.
Present.
Mr. Moyer. Powhatan County, Mr. Fletcher. Mr. Stabler. Town of Ashland, Mr. Martin.
Present.
Thank you. Virginia Conservation Network, Mr. Gordon.
Here.
Mr. Fisher. League of Women Voters, Ms. Cowles.
It's Coles here.
Ms. Cowles, thank you. And Ms. Crutchfield. Chamber RVA, Mr. Easter.
Aye.
Mr. Mayman. NAACP, Mr. Minor. Mr. Johnson.
Present.
Richmond Area Bicycle. I'm sorry?
Mr. Johnson
Mr.
is
Johnson?
present.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Richmond Area Bicycling Association, Mr. Vi. Mr. Burnley.
Present.
Virginia Association of Railway Patrons, Mr. Testerman.
Present.
And VCU, Mr. Leonard.
Present.
Back to you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Cole,
Yes.
I saw it popped on my screen that Dan Mata arrived. You may want to check his name.
Okay, what's his last name?
Yes, sir. Dan's on staff. Dan's on staff.
Oh,
He's
okay,
fine.
I just, please don't take this wrong. I didn't notice. Dan Mata arrived. That's okay. He's staff. I apologize. It just
Great,
popped
thank
up
you.
on my screen. All right, folks, we're going to try to move on with this meeting as best we can. The first part of this is the approval of the agenda for today. Now, I guess the best way of looking to do this is to say, does anyone disapprove of the agenda for today? If so, unmute and say you do. Hearing none, I would have to say that it's, I would have to say that everybody's approved. Would you, is that okay to do it that way, Chet?
Yes, sir. We do need to do a roll call. I hate to say it.
Okay, you have to do a roll. I'm sorry, I didn't realize on that. I didn't know. Sorry.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do the roll call.
Approval of the meeting agenda for today.
Yes, sir. The committee will now be voting on approval of the agenda for today. Goochland County, Mr. Basham.
Approve.
Henrico County, Mr. Barrett.
Approved.
Miss Lancaster.
Approve.
New Kent County, Miss Guthrie.
Approve.
Town of Ashland, Mr. Martin.
Approved.
VCN, Mr. Gordon.
Approve.
LWV, Miss Coles.
Approve.
Chamber RVA, Mr. Easter.
Aye.
NAACP, Mr. Johnson.
Approved.
RABA, Mr. Burnley.
Aye.
VARP, Mr. Testerman.
Approved.
And VCU, Mr. Leonard.
Approve.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I got everyone. Did I miss anyone?
Mr. Chairman, could
Great,
I
I think we're
suggest,
okay.
Mr. Chairman, could I suggest for the sake of the minutes that we have somebody formally make that motion and have a second and then deem the vote that we just had to be in support of that motion? I don't think we actually had a motion now.
I so
Jack?
move. Lisa Guthrie, New Kent.
I'll second John Easter.
Second.
Folks, if you,
Well,
I
go
hope
ahead.
that I hope you've had a chance to look at the meetings from the last meeting. I take it that as Nicole goes through and says your name or whatever, that if you see some correction or something that you think is wrong, is that would be the time to bring it up. Is that correct, Nicole?
Yes, yes, that's correct, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay.
Okay. Should I go ahead and take a roll call for voting on the minutes?
Yes, please.
As Mr. Easter suggested, we probably need a motion and a second to approve the minutes.
John Leonard moves to approve the minutes.
Second.
This is Virginia, and I
Then
have
Martin,
a correction.
seconds.
Virginia, Ms. Coles has a correction, Nicole, chat.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Coles.
On page 9, there's a typo. The long-range transportation plan, it should be Connect RVA 2041.
That is correct. Nicole, do you see that?
Okay, which agenda item is it on page 9?
It's the minutes, page 9, item BB.
Yes, I see it. Thank you for the correction, Ms. Cole.
Thank you for doing the minutes.
Okay, I guess we can go back and say, with the approval of that change, which needed to be made, do I have a motion to accept in a second?
Motion to accept. Virginia Coles making motion to accept. As amended.
John Leonard, second.
Upton Martin, second.
All right, folks, the next thing on our agenda is the public comment period. Although I don't know it's on there, is there anyone out there from the public that wishes to comment? I've seen nothing in the chat section.
Mr. Chairman, I think we need to vote on that motion.
Oh, I thought it was, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I apologize. I thought everybody said aye. I apologize. Please forgive.
I'll go ahead and take the roll call for voting on the minutes.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought that you had already started.
Richmond County, Mr. Basham.
Aye.
Henrico County, Mr. Barrett.
Aye.
Ms. Lancaster.
Aye.
New Kent County, Ms. Guthrie.
Aye.
Town of Ashland, Mr. Martin.
Aye.
VCN, Mr. Gordon.
Aye.
LWV, Ms. Coles.
Aye.
Chamber RVA, Mr. Easter.
Aye.
NAACP, Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
RABA, Mr. Burnley.
Aye.
VARP, Mr. Testerman.
Aye.
And VCU, Mr. Leonard.
Aye.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay, well, let's try this again. I have not seen anything in the chat. Chet has already said that we did not get any questions ahead of time. Is there anyone on the meeting that's for the public that would like to comment? Hearing none, I would take it we can go ahead and move ahead. The next thing is Chairman's report. Please understand, I just got to this, was asked to step in. I don't have a report, so that's going to go to number 5, which is Chet Parsons is going to give us an update.
Yes, sir. Thank you. For those of you who are called in and have access to a screen, we are on page 10 of the agenda, which is the Policy Board and TAC meetings report. Basically, for your information, an update on what the Policy Board and Technical Advisory Committee have been discussing at the last meeting. Their April meetings were canceled, and we did not have the ability to meet virtually. So the May meetings were the most recent meetings, and that's where we were trying to play catch up, basically, on a lot of the business of the organization. So for your information, there's information here about smart scale pre-applications, endorsement of Section 5310 projects, transportation alternatives set-aside project selections, the approval of our revised public engagement plan, the establishment of a Vision Zero work group, tip amendment for GRTC related to articulated vehicles, and then some information regarding RSTP and CMAQ grant funds, which we will have a presentation on later in the agenda today. I'd be happy to take any questions on that. We also wanted to give a current work efforts update, and that's starting on page 13. We are continuing work on our Connect RVA 2045 long-range plan. That is in our we'll call it a phase 1, where we're looking at needs identified and needs assessment for the region, and have had great public engagement and interaction during this time of quarantine, and we're excited about the comments received and the work that we're embarking on with the Long Range Plan Advisory Committee. The Greater RVA Transit Vision Plan is nearing completion, and I would expect hopefully a presentation to this body at the next meeting of the CTAC regarding that. And we're continuing work on lots of bicycle pedestrian projects, the Ashland Trolley Line Trail Study, an update to our regional bicycle and pedestrian plan, which was last done in 2004, the Ashland Complete Streets pilot project, and finally the work program for fiscal year 21 starting July 1 is another item that's on the agenda today. Mr. Vice Chair, that's all I have in terms of the Secretary's report. If anyone has questions, I'd be happy to take them now or could do that later.
Okay, I am just looking here real quick because I'm looking in the chat. Okay, the bottom line is the next thing is John Easter is going to do a presentation, but the 2020 General Assembly legislative update, and Lisa Guthrie. Chet, you know which one is there to go first? Take it away.
Yes, and John, do you want me to drive, or would you like me to turn presentation over to you?
That's
okay.
fine. You do fine. Yeah, Lisa and I are going to do a quick overview of what came out of the General Assembly this year. I'm going to mainly talk about the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. Next slide, please. So this was House Bill 1541, which was carried by Delegate McQuinn, which sets this up and applies to all of the localities within our planning district. Essentially adds a 7.7 cents per gallon gas tax. Sorry, I think that's 7.6. That's a typo on my slide. And 7.7 for the diesel fuel tax. And that tax will start on July 1st. There is a retail sales and use tax component that's 0.7%. And that got deferred because of the COVID situation and won't kick in until October 1st. Next slide. So this is how the funds are going to be distributed. 50% of the money that comes in will go to localities, and they can basically use them as they see fit for various purposes, including construction, maintenance, and transit, and the other things you see listed. 35% of the money that comes in will be used by this new organization, the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, and they will decide how to spend that money on regional transportation projects. And then 15% will go to GRTC to use for transit and mobility services. Next slide, please. So this was the original projection for the revenue that they were expecting back pre-COVID. I'll focus particularly on the fiscal year 21 column. You'll see there was expected to be 132 million coming in through the sales tax, 60 million coming in through the regional fuels tax, for about 193 million. Now, as I mentioned, the start date for the sales tax got deferred for the first quarter of the year, and so we'll automatically lose about a quarter of that. So at least 30-some million will not be received of that projected amount. And obviously then we'll have to see what the impact on the sales tax and the regional fuels tax is from COVID. The April numbers that Secretary Lane reported just earlier this week on sales tax was that it was down very slightly, not as much as you might have expected, frankly, because they had a lot of sales tax coming in through online sales. And so that may not be down as much as we might have been concerned, but we're going to have to see how that plays out. Fuels tax, obviously, right now people are driving a lot less. This will kick in July 1st, so we'll have to see what the driving is. But, you know, at a minimum, the amount coming in is going to be down to around 160 million for fiscal year 21. And then you could see as it escalates over the 5 years, there is an escalation clause in there. The anticipated revenue by fiscal year 26 would be up to about $226 million. And so then down below is, you know, relative to the 50, the 35, and the 15%, how much of that revenue you would expect to go to each of the categories that I outlined before. Next slide. So this new organization gets to approve use of both the regional funds that it decides directly and overall approve the funding for GRTC that comes out of this authority. Localities obviously get to decide themselves how they're going to spend their funds as long as it's within the fairly broad category of specified purposes. Next slide. So what's the organization of this new authority? It is going to have 12 voting members, essentially the mayors from Richmond and Ashland or their designee, the Board of Supervisors chair for each county or their designee, a Commonwealth Transportation Board member who lives within our planning district, and a senator and a delegate who live within that district. And then there will also be non-voting members from VDOT, DRPT, GRTC, and the RMTA. Next slide. The voting on this authority is going to be weighted roughly proportional to population. So you can see the larger organization, the larger localities get 4 votes. Hanover gets 3 votes. Goochland, New Kent, and Powhatan get 2. And Ashland, Charles City, the senator, the delegate, and the CTB member all get 1 vote. Frankly, most of the decisions are going to have to be done pretty much by consensus because there was a supermajority requirement written in so that 4/5 of the population of the area has to agree on any vote. So pretty much you're going to have about 21 votes out of the, I think it's 26 total votes if you add all those up. So pretty much everybody's going to agree, have to agree to get things through this authority. Next slide. So how does this authority fit in with, you know, what's going on with the TPO and with GRTC? First of all, the statute requires that the authority establish a prioritization process that's going to basically have a cost-benefit analysis, and so you have to spend money in accordance with that. And then for GRTC, it is required that they develop a regional public transportation plan, which they're already required to do in conjunction with the TPO. And then ultimately, this new authority will approve DRTC projects that are funded through them. So there's going to be a lot of interaction between the TPO and this new organization and with GRTC. Next slide. So that kind of is my quick overview. I'm trying to move through this quickly because Lisa, frankly, has much more complicated stuff to cover. Wanted to quickly make you aware of other items that happened around the state. Very quickly, there were changes in the membership on the RMTA. One of the, I think it was 5 members that used to be appointed by the mayor will now be appointed by city council president. So they'll have some direct say in who's on that board. There is a study that DRPT is going to be conducting over the next year and a half of east-west passenger rail service going from Hampton Roads through Richmond to the New River Valley. So there was a bill in there to try and get that set up, but they're at least going to study it. Down in Hampton Roads, they are allowed to put tolls on their hot lanes now. They also, when Hampton Roads set up their regional taxing authority, they were expressly precluded from using it for regional transit funding. It could only be used for other transportation purposes. And so they went in this year and got something added so they can now have transit funding for Hampton Roads. And that's funded through a 0.6% tax on the grantor's tax, which is when you deed your property to somebody. If you're the one selling the property, you have to pay an additional 0.6% tax that will help fund, if you're in that region, if you're to help fund that, and a 1% lodging tax also helps fund it. So they'll have specific dedicated funding for transit and in Hampton Roads for the first time. And the last thing I wanted to mention was the governor there's a new governor's airline service incentive fund, basically designed to set up some funding for new airlines. They're expressly precluded from using that money if it would just rob Peter to pay Paul. If you took it from Richmond to put it into Newport News, then it wouldn't qualify for this funding. And there was a 1.25 million put into the budget over 2 years to put a small amount of funding into that. So that's my quick run through. I'm not going to take questions right now. We want to get through Lisa's presentation, and then we'll try and take any questions that you have at the end. So Lisa, why don't you take it from here?
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Chet, for the opportunity to talk about all the changes coming to transportation in Virginia. I guess the most remarkable thing this year is that we concluded the General Assembly winter session on March 12th with monumental legislation, probably the most significant to the structure of transportation funding since 1986 with Governor Baliles. So on that same day, the governor declared the pandemic emergency and those measures, and we've been having quite a ride ever since, and we're still on that roller coaster. So I'm going to hit on some of the most significant things for transportation legislation. Next slide. So we're going to start with a snapshot of where we've been with public transportation. Next slide. This is for public transportation, what it has been each year with the number of passengers on bus, on metro and light rail, commuter rail, with van pools, and with the Hampton Roads Ferry. 172.5 million annual trips. Next slide. Okay, next slide. This is a pie chart of where funding comes from for public transportation. So this gives you an idea of how we are being impacted by the COVID. The fare box generally receives about 26% of total revenues for transit systems. All of them have had to go to free fares so that they would not board the bus from the front of the bus and instead from the rear. So those revenues are not being collected. For local governments down there in the orange, that is 33%, and those will likely be significantly impacted going forward as local governments are struggling to keep up with their requirements on their own funding and staffing needs. State funding, John touched on this. Aubrey Lane mentioned that motor vehicle sales were quite a bit down. Fortunately, we've been able to sustain some other sales tax because of the internet tax that went into effect this year. But gas tax is down, sales tax is down somewhat. And so we won't know until the special session later in the summer, likely in August or September, that what those reassessments might be for anticipated revenue. Next slide. Also, we're taking a look, I work with Danny Plogger with Virginians for High-Speed Rail, and this too is ID of some of those impacts of passenger rail, Amtrak. So you can see that it too is contributing to getting a lot of cars off the road, saving a lot of CO2, and helping people get to their destinations like work. Next slide. So what's next? Next slide. So from the Transportation Omnibus, that is what we're calling the big bills. We have special monies put in for the special structures like bridge replacements. The Mass Transit Fund increased quite a bit. And of course, these are pre-COVID projections. I have to add that caveat. We have, we'll talk about in a minute, the Passenger Rail Authority that was created in the Omnibus bill. And also wanted to note that there's a transit ridership incentive program for urban areas of 100,000 or greater in size. And 25% of that is to look at a way to reduce or eliminate completely fares for low income individuals. Next slide. So John's already talked about the first one here. I'm not sure if my numbers matched up with his, but neither of them are going to be accurate now. So of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, the Hampton Roads Regional Transit Program that he described. One of the things that he didn't mention that was in the 2-year budget is TANF, which is special federal funding for low income, that VTA received $1 million grant, authorization for $1 million grant each year of the budget to implement a program to get people to work via transit. So we are working with the Department of Social Services now to set that up and put out a competitive RFP for transit systems and community organizations to submit jointly applications to receive free transit fare for their workforce development, either people getting to work or getting to job training. So that's in the works. Next slide, please. So what now after COVID? Ridership is down about 90%. In some cases, like with Washington Metro, about 95%. Amtrak's down 98%. We know that it's going to be a challenge when we begin to come out of this crisis to restore confidence in riders getting back on the bus or getting back on the train. So we're already thinking about ways to reassure people that it's safe. There will probably continue to be for some time spacing on buses where the routing will allow it. So that people are not traveling in crowded conditions. Also disinfecting and sanitizing will take some time, and we'll create some changes in scheduling for that. So anyway, those are things that we're dealing with now. DRPT, we're looking at what was coming back in March. They set aside $11 million to support transit agencies, which helped them get through a month to respond to the emergency. And then the CARES Act went into effect at the congressional level, and they appropriated $25 billion for transit agencies across the country and $1 billion for Amtrak. And of that, Virginia received $455.2 million. And the urban areas received some of them directly, and others are receiving it from DRPT, and some of it will go to intercity bus, but it is something that DRPT is kind of holding on to some of the funding to see where we go in this crisis and how to alleviate truly a crisis situation in some of these operations. Next slide, please. So now you've got the overview. Now we want to get into the details, and I offer a special thanks to Nick Donahue, who provided some of this information. Next slide, please. The big bill, Governor's Omnibus Transportation Package, sponsored in the House by Speaker Fillercorn and in the House by Majority Leader Saslaw, and we'll get into some of the details about that in a minute. McQuinn for the Central Virginia Transportation, and Delegate Askew and Senator Lucas for the Hampton Roads. Next slide, please. So this is the crux of it. If you can see, we call this the spaghetti strand chart at the top, and you can't really see it well in this graphic, but you can at least see that there are lines going every which way. So the top boxes in blue are the revenues, where they're coming from. Are they coming from motor fuel sales tax? Are they coming from retail sales, recordation, insurance premiums? There were different sources of revenue, and then they were earmarked to different funds, so that, for instance, the Transportation Trust Fund is further broken down into different modes, but some of these others, like retail sales and recordation, were expressly designated for mass transit. And so sometimes if a certain sector was affected, then its recipient mode would have also been affected. So sometimes there were winners and losers depending on which revenue source was impacted. You may have had sales tax, was affected in some years in a recession or whatever more than others. So now, and this is the first time this has been done since the 80s, now we have a streamlined allocation model, and that is what you see at the bottom of your screen, and that's where everybody is in it together. So all the sources go into one pot of money, and then they are divided out, and it'll go to the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, and then there are percentages established for each mode as to what they receive from that Commonwealth Transportation Fund. Okay, next slide, please. So going to the omnibus bill. So just going to hit the highlights here. It's going to raise the gas tax by 5 cents a year for 2 years, and then it will transition to an index to the Consumer Price Index, so that we don't ever find ourselves in the situation that we've been in, where we were locked into an obsolete source of pricing, so that we can keep abreast of what the changes are. There's also for fuel efficient vehicles, there's a highway use fee, and there was a reduction in the passenger vehicle registration fees. Next slide. We're not going to talk much about these regional sources, but I will say that if you look at the there's now the Northern Virginia, there's the Hampton Roads, there's the I-81, and now there's going to be everybody else. Everybody is going to get a regional fuels tax in areas that had not heretofore been taxed. So those funds in the areas that don't have a regional authority, they will go to the district grant program for those transportation districts to determine how it's to be used. So anyway, unless there's any other questions later about that, I'm going to go forward and not get bogged down into I-81 or anything else specifically. Next slide, please. Okay, for the highway use fee, there had not been when the Secretary of Transportation, Shannon Valentine, convened a work group over the past year. It was called for in the 2019 General Assembly session that there would be a study of the fuel tax and how we compared to other states and how we were going to figure out a way with declining fuel usage because of fuel efficient vehicles. What are we going to move to in the future? Because this is a dwindling source of revenue everywhere, even if we don't even consider electric vehicles, even regular gasoline vehicles are getting better mileage. So they even had KPMG come in and do a study and looked at, let's say, Toyota Corolla from 2000 versus one today had about 20, could have even 20 miles per gallon improvement. And so we are having diminishing returns on the gas tax. So taking a first step toward looking at other ways to generate revenue from electric vehicles who obviously aren't paying any gas tax, they created this highway use fee. They did not want to penalize potential purchases of electric vehicles because it's better for the environment, but they need to figure out some way to pay for those vehicles' wear and tear on the highway and other requirements that that they contribute to, as well as a gasoline vehicle. So so it's kind of a fair share kind of thing. And so they came up with this fee of 85% difference between the fuel tax and the fuel tax paid by the fuel efficient vehicle. So anyway, it repeals the vehicle license tax that they were paying up until now and puts it more on a usage basis. Next slide, please. So there's also Oregon and Utah and some other places have instituted a user fee program and kind of a vehicle miles traveled. And they knew that they couldn't go to it entirely. This is more of a pilot project. You can voluntarily sign up for this use fee instead. If you don't think you drive very much, this might be a way to go, that you pay per mile fee capped at the highway user fee. So so you can opt into this starting in 2022. Next slide, please. So the Transportation Trust Fund, here are the percentages. Remember, back on that spaghetti strand chart and down at the bottom where everybody gets now a percentage of that pot of money, that here are the percentages for the Transportation Trust Fund. And so transit will now get 23% in the past. Now it's not exactly equivalent, but previously they got 14.7%. Now it's 23%. So but there are some other factors that went into this. It's not a straight across the line comparison. But this is how it's been designated thus far. Next slide, please. So the reason that this omnibus was a major step forward is that it provides additional smart scale funding in those districts without a regional authority. It increases transit funding by 45%. It addresses the bridges and other special structure needs that are critical because otherwise there was no way to pay for those. It provides a WMATA PREA match for federal funding, and it increases funding for highway and road maintenance. Next slide, please. So within the Transportation Trust Fund, there was the Mass Transit Fund, and it's 23% of the TTF, and then it is further divided this way. So you can see that the majority of it is for operating, 27%, 18% for capital. And remember that a state of good repair on a bus is an operating expense. So there's going to be a great deal of demand for that post-COVID. So a lot of people are going to use the relief funds from the CARES Act to keep the buses rolling. So 6% for the transit ridership program I referenced earlier, and then 2.5% for special programs like transportation demand management. Next slide, please. Talk a little bit about the rail fund. The rail fund consolidates the rail enhancement fund and the IPROC, the Intercity Passenger Rail Operating and Capital Fund. And it includes funds for the VRE track access as well, which will be important for the Atlantic Gateway and the Long Bridge. Next slide, please. And these funds will be administered by the Passenger Rail Authority. That is a new creation. It is a new political subdivision, and I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but there will be representation here from all over the state, and they will manage much of the rail funds and the under the auspices of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Finally, next slide, please, is safety legislation. The seatbelt measures did not pass, but the handheld personal communications device did pass, but is delayed until January of 2021. It's going to take a lot of education and orientation to get people ready to move to this, so that they're accustomed to using a Bluetooth or some other hands-free device, so that you are not in a vehicle using a laptop, a tablet, or a cell phone for any purpose, for talking as well as texting and emailing. So that finally passed after many years of attempting it. So I guess I will pause now. Next slide for questions. Okay.
I'd like to ask, I see Champ has asked you a question there, Lisa, but I'd like to ask you if you've got questions, if you could type them into the chat so Lisa could look at them, because that way we won't be talking over each other.
Okay. I see that Champ asked about the additional revenue. Back on the pie chart, we've got about 24% of revenue that transit is relying upon is for the fare box. And what did I say? 26%, I'm sorry, is for the fare box. So, so right now they're just absorbing that, and that is a loss. That cannot continue forever. GRTC has indicated that with the CARES Act funding that they have received, they can probably go into the fall with the fare-free riders, but at some point they're going to have to convert back to charging a fare, even if there's new technology used so that you're not interacting with the bus driver, similar to the Pulse.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And by the way, Amber Lancaster, we saw that you came on. I made sure that Chet Parsons knew that you were on the meeting.
Okay.
Okay, Champ has asked for just a couple of minutes to bring us a legislative update on the pedestrian and bicycle. Champ, you want to take that away?
I will, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Don't have any slides for you. Just a couple of additional bills that passed. I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of it. We had House Bill 543 pass. We had Delegate Carr and also Senator Morrison, who had electric bike regulation bills that went through. We got that in. House Bill 1442 allows for actual photo enforcement, speed enforcement in school and work zones. So that's really a big change from where we've been in the past. So I wanted you to be aware of that. Two other bills that we worked on in the bike and ped area that are going to have big ramifications. House Bill 1705, That is a bill that Kay Corey introduced, and beginning July 1st, you actually have to stop for a pedestrian in a crosswalk. In Virginia, it's been a yield, and that's led to some contention. So that's a big change. That bill's been before the legislature for at least 20 years. We finally got that through. And then finally, Senate Bill 437, Scott Servell sponsored a vulnerable road user bill. That really does two things. If you hit and seriously injure or kill a bicyclist or a pedestrian, there'll be a class 1 misdemeanor charge for that. Many times, somebody hits a cyclist, they hit a walker, and the person is concussed or they're killed. The driver says, well, I didn't see him or whatever, and you don't get both sides of that discussion. So this will make it a class 1 misdemeanor. And also, along with that bill, if you are, let's say you're stopped in traffic and there's a bike lane to your right, people were going into the bike lane to pass the car, and then they were clipping a cyclist that may have been riding up from the rear. So you can't pass in a bicycle lane, which hopefully will avoid unnecessary injuries and or fatality. So just want to let you all know, very successful session in the bike ped world, and I want to make sure you all were aware of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, please, if you've got questions for these folks, please type it into the chat. They can get back to you and answer your questions by typing it back to you. At this time, we're going to go to Mr. Ariel, has an update on Connect RVA 2045. Mr. Ariel.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
You're coming through loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let me make it full screen so that it's clearer to everybody. Okay. So today I'll be giving you all an update about the Connect RVA 2045, the November 2019 CTAC meeting. We provided the brief overview of the Connect RVA 2045, which is basically the long-range transportation plan for the Richmond region, which is federally mandated. We need to update this plan every 4 to 5 years. The plan is basically the vision for next 20 years of transportation improvement in the Richmond region. Not only it's a vision, but it also needs to include a constrained list of transportation projects, which would include all modes of transportation. This is the region's first performance-based plan, meaning that we have to do a systematic review of transportation system performances to define the regional investment priorities. The LRTP Connect RVA 2045 is spearheaded by the LRTP Advisory Committee, which consists of the TAC members. We have some CTAC representation as well, and additional members from the region as well. So this is the LRTP process flow which we are following. The first phase, as in any planning process, is the needs assessment. So we are calling this transportation needs assessment. Once we have the needs and the issues, then the second phase or the second step is to have a strategic direction to solve these needs, in which we look at the vision for the region, we establish the goals and the objectives. And since this is a performance-based plan, we have to have something called as performance measures as well, which would measure the objectives. The third phase is planning. So based on the needs assessment, we convert those transportation issues and needs into transportation projects, which have the magnitude for an LRTP, and create a universe of projects. The fourth phase is programming. So obviously the funds are limited. Our needs are there's going to be a lot of needs, but we have certain fundings available. So we project funding which is available to us in the next 28 years till 2045, and try to establish a fiscally constrained plan through a project prioritization process. So that would be done in stage 4. The final phase is the evaluation of the plan. We have to look at how we did in terms of environmental justice, in terms of public participation, and in terms of overall performance of the plan. So that's because this is a performance-based plan. This is the additional step we have. Along with that, we are also doing a scenario planning process, which is a kind of sign line process. We are not going full-fledged this time because of the timing constraint, but we'll do a academic exercise of scenario planning and see how the results are, and then try to include the outcome of that in this plan, so that for the next plan, 2050 plan, we might be able to use that. And then the final step is obviously adoption by the LRTP Advisory Committee first, and then the Policy Board, and then it has to go to FTA as well as FHWA for the adoption. So throughout this process, public engagement is very important. And within all these phases, we have a continuous public outreach process, but we also have specialized formal public input times within these 5 phases as well, and I'll talk about that in detail. So the federal guidance is that for this plan, the audience, this comes from federal guidance. The audience is obviously citizens, representatives of transportation employees, freight shippers, private providers of transportation, representatives of users of public transportation, representatives of the bike and ped transportation facilities, representatives of the elderly and individual with disabilities, providers of non-emergency transportation service who are not receiving Section 53 funds. And the outreach has to be also focused in EJ population, population with low income, minority population, people with limited English proficiency, and zero-card household, as well as other interested parties. So the public engagement process, we try to create promotion and awareness throughout the process. The first step was to get a dedicated website. We have a dedicated website now, www.connect.rva2045.org. Whatever is presented to the LRTP AC board, any documents we published regarding to the plan, everything is published out there. We also have interactive maps in which people can provide comments throughout the process, as well as within specific public comment period, people can comment on that as well. We are doing media coverages based on press releases and ads, which are mandatory based on federal regulation. Email notices, we have a listserv of interested parties. We email that, and obviously social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also YouTube. Once we complete our meetings, we post the meeting recordings in YouTube. So this is the timeline for the public engagement period. As I mentioned earlier, we have 5 stages based on the process, which I described earlier. The first one obviously is need assessment, which we just finished yesterday. The second one is to provide input to the vision. The third one, obviously, to provide comments on the universe of projects. The fourth one, which is the funding, would be to review candidate projects and investment programs. And then the final is to review the whole plan and provide comments on the plan document. And we have that plan throughout this year and next year until the October 2021, when the plan would be adopted. So currently now we are in the transportation needs assessment phase, the first phase of the process. So this task basically had 3 subtasks within it. The first one was to develop the socioeconomic data for the base year of the plan, which is 2017, as well as the future horizon year, which is 2045. So we have to look, we developed the data which we are going to use in the plan for the base year as well as the future year. This was a joint effort between RRTPO and locality members as well as state partners. There was a long period, like around 18 months, to develop this data, and this data has already been adopted by the TPO policy board. The second part is to analyze this data. The socioeconomic data was just raw data based on our projections, but the document which we are calling 2045 long-range growth forecast analysis is basically the analysis of that data, looking at both the historic trends from 1970s and also look at what we have projected. This document has been completed, and now it's available in our website, dedicated website under resources under documents. So if you have a chance, you can probably review that. The second task was to develop a Richmond Tri-Cities travel demand model. Since this is a performance-based plan, the travel demand model would be a handy tool, and it would be used in many steps, like the project prioritization tool and the evaluation of the plan. The third most important task within this is the transportation needs assessment, which I'll be talking in detail. This is ongoing, and it's targeted to be approved by the LRTP Advisory Committee on the coming meeting next week. So what we did was basically identify regional and local multimodal transportation issues based on congestion, safety, lack of interconnectivity, operations problem, maintenance issues, inadequate roadway transit capacity, transit expansion, accessibility, as well as other issues like travel demand management, transportation system resiliency, as well as economic development. And based on these issues, we established an LRTP specific needs that would be in the inventory. So this was done basically by staff review of regional and local transportation plans and studies, which included the major transportation studies like 288 360 study, I-95 overlap study, I-95 corridor study, as well as the IJRs and IMRs, which VDOT conduct. Also looking at the STARS studies, looking at the transit vision plan studies, GRTC transit development plan, as well as other studies. We also looked at the local comprehensive plan, small area plan, local transportation plans. So based on all these documents, we just picked out the issues which was already pointed out in those documents. Similarly, for the future, we ran the Richmond Tri-Cities travel demand model, providing the 2045 land use data, which is basically the employment, population, and other variables for 2045, and the transportation network, which we call as the existing and committed, which means that anything which has been committed for completion for construction by 2026, which is the SIP year, current SIP year, we provided that in the network and then ran that model. And based on that, we got capacity constraint for different segments of the regional network, and that we provided that in the issue identification list as well. Apart from that, based on the local knowledge as well as their specific field knowledge, subject knowledge, LRTP Advisory Committee members provided some additional issues into the list. And then finally, we also had public input in which common public provided the issues they are facing in transportation in the Richmond region. So the first list of the issue identification was provided to the LRTP Advisory Committee on April 1st. We broke down the list into three categories. One was like the LRTP specific issues, which trying to see the magnitude of the issues, whether they are LRTP specific or not. The second one was VTrans, the state transportation plan, has identified needs, and the needs are basically the segments in our transportation networks in four different categories, which they have categorized: the corridors of statewide significance, regional networks, safety, and UDA. Based on their issue identification, their needs, we captured all those in our region as well. And then we also identify other issues like policy program issues, which are basically hard to resolve through any specific transportation project. These projects need a funding mechanism change in local, regional, maybe state or federal levels. So we are going to describe this in the LRTP, but they won't call for a LRTP constrained list of projects. And then some of the issues which are deemed local are in that category as well. So for the public input, we had the public input open from February and it ended on April 15th. We found out 135 issues. First of all, we had a wiki maps, which is basically an interactive map in our project website. So anybody could go into that and list out the issue or point out the issue in the map, and that was done. And then CTAC member Mr. Steele also provided us the transportation survey done by the real estate agents, which had information. We took that as well. We also had some community meetings before the pandemic, and based on those community meetings, we got some feedback as well. So we included those in the issues list as well. So the formal public review period, after all the input had been done, we came out with a total of 1,089 issues in total. The formal public review period is for 15 days, and it just ended yesterday, May 20th. So far, I checked in the website, and we have received 10 comments on the list. The list would go to the LRTP Advisory Committee for approval on May 28th, which is next Thursday. And then it'll also go to the RRTPO Policy Board for approval. The next steps, obviously, is to, as described in the steps or the phases for the long-range transportation plan, is development of vision, goals, and objectives. And then obviously conversion of these issues into projects, which staff would be working once the issues list would be approved. And that's all I have. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Ariel, thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. I don't see any messages in the chat at this point in time. I would like to bring up, we're going to go to Chet Parsons next, but what I want to make you aware is that in just a few minutes, there's going to be a place that's going to be CTAC announcements. I'd like to ask that if you feel that you're going to have an announcement, that you would put in the chat and send it to me so that I have your name and can call on you individually. Chet, are you there? You ready to go into the Unified Planning Work Program?
Yes, sir. Sure. So I wanted to give you a brief update on what the policy board will be considering at their meeting in June, and that's approval of our fiscal year 21 work program. If you have access to your screen, I'm going to give a few highlights there. We have three major focus areas for FY21. First is continuing development of the long-range transportation plan, as Sulab just discussed. The second is to be a resource for the newly created Central Virginia Transportation Authority. And John and Lisa both gave a good overview of what that authority is required and expected to do. So we think that the TPO is a natural fit to resource that agency and help them prioritize projects for the region. And then finally, we want to be a forum to discuss active transportation and all that means and their benefits to the region, including the Ashland to Petersburg Trail, which, as most of you know, VDOT just completed a detailed study on, and we are continuing to work with agencies around the region to emphasize the need for that trail to be constructed. Our work program is very, very similar in structure to the one that was adopted last year. We meet 10 federal planning factors that are required, and we have 5 specific task areas. Those are program support and administration, general development and comprehensive planning, long-range transportation planning, short-range transportation planning, and finally, rural transportation planning. Our budget, our proposed budget, is on the screen now, and it comes in at just under $3 million for the year, divided by work task. I'd be happy to, if you all have any questions, hopefully you've had a chance to look at this prior to the meeting. I'd be happy to take those in the chat or discuss at a later date. The split, the percentages for each of the 5 categories, 61% is dedicated to the long-range transportation planning task that we do, with another 16% for short-range transportation. And short-range really covers TIP amendments, RSTP, CMAQ, grant funding, a lot of the work we do with the member jurisdictions to get projects moving towards completion. And then 11% into general development and comprehensive planning. That's a quick overview. There was a lot more detail for the policy board, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions, Mr. Vice Chair, or we can keep moving.
Yeah, I don't see anything in the chat. I want to take a second to look at that, but not seeing anything right now. It looks like we're going to go to Miles Bushing for the RSTBG and CMAQ prioritizations. Miles, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. One moment, let me get the screen for you. Okay, you should all be able to see the screen now. This is RSTP CMAQ, which hopefully you're all familiar with. It's an annual process. So just a quick overview. Selecting projects for RSTP CMAQ funding is one of the primary functions of the TPO. That's that short-range planning that Chet was just talking about. With that, essentially, the TPO decides on projects and allocates funds. And then those funds are included in the state's 6-year improvement program, which is really where it's all nailed down for funding. Currently, the 6-year improvement program is suspended. The development this year has been put on hold given the uncertainty with the financial side because of the pandemic. So what we've done this year is taking a slightly different approach, which is prioritizing projects, and then we'll be able to adopt the allocations whenever we're able to move forward and advance new projects again. So quick overview of each of the programs. STBG, the Surface Transportation Block Grant, this is what we know as RSTP as well, which is Regional Surface Transportation Program. This is a flexible source of funding, and it covers pretty much anything: transit, bike ped, new roads, anything along those lines. So it's a pretty flexible source. We get around $20 million each year, and that funding covers both existing projects that have already been selected and then new projects that have been selected through this annual cycle. So what we did, as with every year, the projects were initially scored by the TPO, VDOT, and DRPT staff using the selection guidelines that the policy board has adopted. Those projects, as they were scored, were then presented to TAC, which recommended a prioritization, and that prioritization was then sent to the policy board to vote on. So that prioritization will be used to then go through and allocate funds for new projects, starting in order with the highest ranks. So that's included on page 20 of your packet. That's the RSTP program. The second program is the CMAQ program. CMAQ is the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. It's designed and dedicated to improve air quality in the region. So the region currently meets all of the national ambient air quality standards, but previously we didn't meet the standards for ozone under the 1997 standards. So the CMAQ funds that we receive are kind of a carryover from when we didn't meet the standards. So we get about $8 million each year. So similar process, the projects were actually scored by VDOT staff. So the way this works is that VDOT staff analyzes the potential reduction of NOx and VOC, which are the precursors of ozone, and then looks at the cost effectiveness of those reductions. So it looks at how many kilograms per year are being reduced and how many dollars that costs based on the cost of the project. So as with the RSTP, TAC received a recommendation from staff based on those scores, and then they provided a prioritization which went to the policy board. So that's kind of the overview of where we are right now. Typically we would have already selected projects for the year, but it's somewhat on hold right now. Staff is working with VDOT to finalize the draft allocations so we can take them back to TAC for next month. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the overall process. If you have any questions about specific projects, I would ask that you email me, because then I can provide you the applications and more of the details.
Thank you, Miles, and I appreciate you giving us your email address. A lot of times that helps because things come up or we just don't, may not have time. Appreciate that, so folks can get in touch with you. The next thing we have is CTAC announcements. Now, I did not see anybody send me anything in chat. Bear with me. Mike Testerman just said something here. This is just an update because, and please don't take us wrong, I did not know. It's come out to everybody, but just so you're aware, is Herb Richmond wasn't able to be here today, but he has been in the hospital in the past, and he had gotten a staph infection there, but he's in a rehab center in Amelia, and his doctor said he's able to go home and continue therapy. So if you know him, please let him know that you're thinking of him, whatever. Herb's been around for a long time. Champ has also said Bud Vise had some health issues, and he encourages anybody to reach out and just touch base with him. So that's the only thing I'm seeing here. The thing is that if you'll go to page 22, which is your very, very last page, it is future meeting topics. And I would encourage anyone that if you want to see something that needs to be changed, or that if you want something to be on the agenda, that you let Chet know so that he can look to see if we can have someone. But I would like to, I'm going to combine something here because it's future meeting topics, comments, and next meeting. I'm just combining something here. Is just to make you aware is that at the next meeting, we do have the election of officers. Now, I do not know, and you'll be notified, but I do not know if we'll all be together or if it will be another virtual meeting. So just keep an eye out for, for the updated information. I know they'll be coming from the planning RVA, and but the election of officers is always an important time and things of that nature. And if anyone's new, I know they'll be introducing them. So, I mean, I combined all three. I'm not trying to get, it was on there. I just said since it was there, and it's on the next future meeting topics. So does anyone have any comments they want to make? I mean, I've read off Mike's and Champ. I'm looking in the chat. I don't see anything there. Again, our next meeting is for July the 10th. I'm sure they'll be letting us know plenty ahead of time whether it's going to be to get together, and if so, what the criteria or procedures will be, or if it's going to be virtual. Chet, if there's nothing else, please understand I would need someone in the audience to have a motion to adjourn. Unless, Chet, I'm going to let you speak first.
Yes, sir. I think that's sufficient. We do have, I did want to make clear, I think the next meeting is July 16th. And yes, please keep your eye out for what form that meeting will take place in, and we'll certainly update everyone as soon as we know. Good job, Mr. Vice Chairman.
A little different this way. Could I have someone in the audience unmute and motion to adjourn, and then I need a second.
Chairman, this is Charlie Rasnick with Hanover. I'll make the motion to adjourn.
John Easter, second.
Second.
Move that we adjourn.
If hearing, I don't think Nicole's on here anymore. If I don't hear objections, I'm going to assume everybody says approved. All right, Chad, listen, everybody, please be safe. Have a good one and enjoy this Memorial Day weekend the best you can.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Bob.
Thanks for your leadership today.